Greetings to you all. Welcome. This is Elder I remain Ijem Chima Santos. Once again, I greet you, my listeners. I want to take a time to address a crucial issue that has been ongoing in Nigeria. As you may be aware, for years now we have witnessed incessant killing and massacres and rights abuse. Yet, the international community seems to have paid deaf ears to it. However, I am heartened to see that the United States of America Congress, specifically the House Committee of Foreign Affairs, has finally taken notice. Their recent meeting to discuss this very issue is indeed a step to the right directions that might bring freedom to us all, and as well as end the killing of Christians around Nigeria and abroad. Yes, I'm going to show you how this meeting was held, which is giving me joy right now, and I know in as much as I have joy, you are also going to have a whole lot of joy too. Please don't forget to follow this page, Elderwood, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Elderstar TV. Please drop your comment. Tell us what you think. Thank you. I'm going to play the video right now. Let me show you how this meeting went.
From my time on USERV, I can tell you with certainty that the world is not paying enough attention to the growing humanitarian disaster in Nigeria.
The government allows Fulani violence to continue with impunity. There is broad concern that this reflects a plan to forcibly Islamize Nigeria in violation of its secular constitution. Last week, the Nigerian Catholic Bishops' Conference released a letter expressing deep concern that some of the 12 northern states that impose Sharia law ordered Catholic and other Christian schools closed for 5 weeks in forced observance of Ramadan, and they cited the Constitution's guarantee of a secular state. Fulani attacks are indiscriminate and devastate entire Christian villages. Ignoring citizens' appeals for help, Nigeria's government fails to effectively stop these attacks. Take Benue, where Catholic priests and other Christians were recently abducted in Fulani raids.
The quest to Islamize the land appears high on the agenda of some of the powerful and influential Muslims in Nigeria. There is a campaign to take land to spread Islam, and there is the hemorrhaging of Christian farmers from the central region of Nigeria and Benue State, and Makurdi Diocese in particular, as they are forced to abandon fertile lands that used to feed the nation, which classify Benue as the food basket of the nation.
The purpose of this hearing is to discuss the deteriorating state of religious freedom in Nigeria and the urgent need to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern pursuant to the International Religious Freedom Act. I would like to recognize myself for an opening comment, and we'll yield to my friend and colleague, Ms. Jacobs, for any opening comments you might have, and members of the subcommittee. According to the Catholic News Agency and EWTN News, quote, Archbishop Ignatius Kaigama is concerned over the seemingly endless violence against Christians that claimed at least 58 lives this past weekend and hundreds of others in recent weeks. It is our prayer, he said, that something definitive will be done to stop the situation that is inhuman. Shockingly, that was more than a dozen years ago and part of my opening remarks at a hearing that I held on July 10th, 2012, one of several hearings, 8 in all, on religious persecution in Nigeria, and since then, things have only gotten worse. 1 year later, in 2013, I visited Archbishop Kaigama in Jos, Nigeria. We visited churches, 5 of them that had been recently firebombed by Boko Haram, and spent hours listening to survivors tell their stories. Despite their numbing loss and pain, I was absolutely amazed at the survivors, about their faith, very deep faith, their courage and resilience. They were not going to quit, but they were looking to the government for help, and it was not coming. I also met with an evangelical believer named Habila Adamu. Dragged from his home by Boko Haram terrorists, he was ordered to renounce his faith. With an AK-47 pressed to his face, he was asked, "Are you ready to die as a Christian?" With extraordinary courage, Habila answered, "Yes, I am ready to die as a Christian." He was asked a second time, and he repeated his answer. His wife was pleading, "Please don't kill my husband." And yet he said, "Yes, I am ready to die as a Christian." This time, the terrorist pulled the trigger. A bullet ripped through Habila's face. He crumpled to the ground, bleeding profusely, left for dead. By some miracle, he survived. I met him at an IDP camp in Jos. I asked him to come to Washington to tell his story. He did. And at the congressional hearing, he said this to our subcommittee, this subcommittee: "I am alive because God wants you to have this message. Knowing Christ is so much deeper than merely knowing Boko Haram's story of hate and intolerance." He closed his testimony with this: "Do everything you can to end this ruthless religious persecution, but know Christ first." To the end, everything he did was to witness, to radiate his love for God, but he was also calling on us to get involved and do something. Since then, however, the wanton violence against Christians in Nigeria has grown significantly worse. A couple of days ago, the Pillar Catholic reported, and I quote, "While Christians are receiving ashes last Wednesday to begin Lent, news broke out in Nigeria that a priest had been brutally murdered by kidnappers who had stormed his rectory the night before and kidnapped him. With deep sorrow and righteous indignation, I condemn in the strongest terms the relentless and tragic wave of kidnappings targeting priests, pastoral agents, and the faithful," Bishop Kundi said in a March 7th, just a couple days ago, press conference, which expressed outrage over the kidnaps and the brutal murder of his priests. According to the sources in the diocese, Father Sylvester was bound by his kidnappers. He was shot in the head, and I saw the picture. It is heartbreaking to look at. Shot at close range with an assault rifle, and according to the officials of his diocese. The systematic slaughter and abuse of Nigerian believers must stop. Delay is denial and a death sentence to so many. One of our distinguished witnesses today, Bishop Wilfred Anagbe of the Diocese of Makurdi, Nigeria, traveled a long distance to be with us today and will testify, and this is from his testimony. Militant Fulani herdsmen are terrorists. They steal and vandalize. They kill and boast about it. They kidnap and rape, and they enjoy total impunity for this from the elected officials. None of them, I repeat his quote, none of them have been arrested and brought to justice. In December of 2020, President Trump designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern, only to be reversed without justification by Secretary Blinken in November of 2021. And I know I asked him at hearings. I asked him privately, but also asked him at open hearings, why? Never got a good answer. Religious leaders in Nigeria were outraged by the Secretary's decision. One Nigerian bishop challenged the Secretary and said, "Christian persecution is more intense than ever." And that was Bishop Mamza. And Genocide Watch has called Nigeria a killing field of defenseless Christians, quote unquote. Yet the government of Nigeria has failed to make progress against religiously motivated persecution of Christians, despite religious freedom being enshrined as an essential human right in their constitution. Likewise, Nigerian legal framework supports pluralism at both federal and state levels, but glaring contradictions exist, especially with laws that criminalize blasphemy, some even carrying the death penalty. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, was, quote, appalled that the State Department did not redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. USCIRF had recommended, and we have the former chairman here, Tony Perkins, had recommended this designation 4 years in a row, from 2021 to 2024, and said, quote, there is no justification as to why the State Department continues to fail to redesignate Nigeria as a CPC. And again, CPC, as you know, carries significant sanctions, a whole broad array of sanctions that the President and the Secretary of State are empowered to level on a country that commits persecution. When the former Secretary of State Blinken held a joint press conference with the Nigerian Foreign Minister on January 23, 2024, following the Christmas Eve massacre, which targeted killings by radical Fulani terrorists and took the lives of hundreds of Christians, he did offer his condolences, and I watched it. I was glad to see that. But we need to take it beyond just saying, I feel sorry for you. And these Christian killings recurred the following year, just 3 months ago. Make no mistake, these ongoing attacks are based on religion and diverting attention from it tonight. Let me just say parenthetically, I tried for 3 years to get the Clinton administration to designate Boko Haram as an FTO, of the Obama administration, as a foreign terrorist organization. I held hearing after hearing, and they wouldn't do it. On the day I was marking up my legislation to do this, just that, State Department said, oh, we're going to designate them an FTO. And after all the crimes they were committing, later it was the Chibok girls, it was all the other atrocities being committed by Boko Haram, and they wouldn't even give them the FTO status so we could start investigating where they get their money, their weapons, and the like. Make no mistake, all of these attacks are based on religion, like I said, and diverting attention from it denies that we have seen with our own eyes. This is religious cleansing. It needs to stop, and the perpetrators need to be brought to justice. Last year, the House Foreign Affairs did adopt my resolution, H-Res 82, calling on the Biden administration to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. It passed exactly 1 year ago, almost a year ago, in the committee, but it never came to the floor. While I strongly believe that President Trump will again designate Nigeria as a CPC and do much more to assist the persecuted church, including the outreach to the Nigerian president, Tinubu, last night I did reintroduce the resolution, and I hope we will have a robust debate and it will get marked up. Help can't come fast enough. The killing fields are every day, every single day, and we need to do more and do everything within our power to try to mitigate it. Let's not forget these horrifying facts. Northern Nigeria, and this is just northern Nigeria alone, has seen the destruction of over 18,000 churches since 2009. 18,000 churches. I saw 5 of them, totally burnt out, and many people killed with car bombs and the like. An August 2024 report from the Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa found that 55,910 people were killed and 21,000 people were abducted in the context of terror groups in Nigeria within just 4 years, from October 2019 to September 2023. I would point out that approximately 34,000 are moderate Muslims that have been murdered in Islamic attacks, and we speak out for them as well. I have met with imams in Nigeria, and if they speak, they're visited that following week by one of these radical Islamist groups, and it's not pretty. They'll kill them or do other kinds of mischief. About 5 million Christians have been displaced and forced into internally displaced person camps, IDP camps, within Nigeria. The 2023 watch list released in January by Open Doors this past January found that 89% of the Christians who were martyred in the world are in one country, Nigeria. The targeted violence starkly highlights the precarious state of religious freedom in Nigeria. Again, we're asking the President, Tinubu, he's got to take action. And we're going to, I'm hoping to lead a delegation to Nigeria. We've got to raise these issues, but it starts at the top. I've been to Abuja many times. The President has real power. He can do it. And we're calling on him to do that. Let me also say that and I will put the rest of my statement into the record, but this hearing, we're hoping will be a catalyst for action by our own government and also by Congress, and of course, above all, the executive branch. The new president has a lot to do, and I think he'll do this, and then, if necessary, impose sanctions. Where that has happened, there is change. Where it doesn't happen, the status quo, the killing fields continue. I'd like to yield to Ms. Jacobs for any opening comments you might have.
Nigeria now ranks 6 out of 66 on the just released 2025 Global Terrorism Index. Nigeria is the world's deadliest country for Christians, according to the respected group Open Doors. Currently, militant groups of nomadic Fulani Muslim herders are reported by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, among others, to be the greatest threat to Nigerian Christians, particularly those that we're now seeing in the Middle Belt farming communities. In Benue, Plateau, Kaduna, and other Middle Belt states, thousands of Christians have been killed, maimed, and raped, and millions of them have been driven from their lands and are now homeless due to Fulani attacks. This is the heart of Nigeria's breadbasket, and as their farming families are slaughtered or forced to flee, the region's suffering is compounded by growing mass hunger. Moreover, the targeted indigenous people of the Middle Belt Christian communities face the Nigerian government's decision to tolerate this persecution. The federal government in Abuja remains passive in the face of desperate cries for help. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees reports of Mimi, one of 2 million IDPs, internally displaced persons, in Benue State. She survived a Fulani attack 3 years ago while her family was tending the yam fields on her farm. It reports, when they looked up, they saw armed men. There was no time to run. The men raped and killed Mimi's 11-year-old daughter. Mimi herself was raped and her husband was killed. A hunter later found her injured and unconscious and helped her into the bush. They hid her there for 2 days before it was safe enough for him to bring her to the camp. There she received medical treatment and reunited with her 2 sons, now aged 12 and 15. I lost everything, says Mimi. If you go to my village, everything has been burned down. I cannot farm any longer. And it's not only me. We all went through these things. The government allows Fulani violence to continue with impunity. There is broad concern that this reflects a plan to forcibly Islamize Nigeria in violation of its secular constitution. Last week, the Nigerian Catholic Bishops' Conference released a letter expressing deep concern that some of the 12 northern states that impose Sharia law ordered Catholic and other Christian schools closed for 5 weeks in forced observance of Ramadan, and they cited the Constitution's guarantee of a secular state. Over the last generation, a portion of the Fulani nomadic herder population has become well-armed with automatic weapons and aggressive in targeting undefended Christians in Nigeria's Middle Belt farming areas. Various observers on the ground assert that the Fulani militants are not attacking to graze cattle, as some maintain, but rather to drive out the Christians from their ancestral lands and to take control of land, of villages and larger geographic areas. The UNHCR report above states, quote, nearly all the 3,790 registered residents of Ichwa IDP camp and many other camps dotted around Benue State were smallholder farmers, forced here by violent land grabs. A Benue Catholic priest told reporters it's all about seizing the lands and changing the demography of Benue State. The Fulani terrorists want to seize the fertile lands of Benue, chase away the people from the land, and occupy the lands for themselves, he said. A 2023 study by Nigerian scholars on Plateau State found the great majority of Plateau's indigenous people from non-Fulani ethnic groups believe that Fulani violence is motivated by land grabbing, jihad, and Fulanization, compared with smaller percentages who blame cattle rustling. Cattle rustling does occur, but Fulani attacks are indiscriminate and devastate entire Christian villages. Ignoring citizens' appeals for help, Nigeria's government fails to effectively stop these attacks. Take Benue, where Catholic priests and other Christians were recently abducted in Fulani raids. A priest identified to the press 3 key areas along the Benue River, and he names them. It's in my testimony, where Fulani terrorists crossed from Nasarawa State to attack overwhelmingly Christian villages in Benue. The government ignores church pleas to place military posts near these known hotspots or have naval patrols on the river, a Benue priest told me. Or Kaduna, where on February 26th, Truth Nigeria reported over 200 Christians are being held hostage, starved, and tortured in a camp near an army base in a wooded area off the busy Kaduna-Abuja expressway. It came to light when 3 months after being abducted from their homes, 8 hostages in dire condition were released after a ransom payment of equivalent to $27,000. They had been chained, whipped, and starved and referred to as infidels by captives speaking the Fulani's full-day language. They witnessed others dying from starvation or shot dead when the ransoms didn't come. And as far as we know, it's still there. And just last weekend, a Christian from Adamawa State, Sunday Jackson, had a death penalty upheld by the High Court of Nigeria for, in self-defense, killing an attacker on his property. The pontifical aid to the church in need counts scores of priests' kidnappings in Nigeria, with over 20 murdered in recent years. 7 Catholic priests have been kidnapped since January. A week ago, Father Sylvester of St. Mary's Church in Kaduna was kidnapped and slain. 2 pastors in Kaduna and Gombe states with the Evangelical Church of Winning All were murdered this year already. Abuja's Archbishop Kagame strongly criticized the escalating kidnappings of Catholic priests, citing, quote, poor leadership at all levels, local government, state government, and federal government. Some conclude that Abuja's passivity, including failing even to collect data on the attacks, shows government complicity. The board chair of the Nigerian private group International Society for Civil Liberties and the Rule of Law is among them. The State Department report on international religious freedom solely gives a neo-Marxian materialistic theory for Fulani aggression. It describes the relentless attacks against Christian farming families on their own farms and violence against priests and pastors in their church and rectories as clashes between 2 rural socioeconomic groups fighting over scarce natural resources, a result of climate change. It ignores the evidence. It overlooks possible radicalization of Fulani herdsmen who travel across porous borders in the Sahel and northeastern Nigeria, regions recognized by the U.S. government as terror hotbeds. It shows no concern for their automatic weapons, distributed reportedly by the Mayeti groups, the cattle breeders, lobbying association members. It disregards the Nigerian government's toleration of this violence by allowing it to continue with impunity. I therefore urge Congress to call for the State Department as a first step to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. I am certain that the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom will soon renew its recommendation of CPC designation for Nigeria. Placing Nigeria on the U.S.'s short list of the world's most egregious religious freedom violators is warranted and would be a foundation for further human rights initiatives by the new administration here. It is the law. It's standing up for religious freedom is part of American exceptionalism. It's part of our heritage, our traditions, and our Constitution to respect the unalienable right of religious freedom.
There is a problem. Now coming to a solution is our challenge. So thank you for your insight. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Tony Perkins. I served as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom from 2018 to 2022. And as the chairman said, I served as both chair and vice chair. From my time on USERV, I can tell you with certainty that the world is not paying enough attention to the growing humanitarian disaster in Nigeria. Despite its strategic importance as Africa's most populous country, these warning lights are flashing because of this systematic religious persecution driven primarily by Islamists, and it's going unaddressed. Christians are the primary targets. They're murdered, kidnapped, raped, and terrorized on almost a daily basis, as has already been discussed. The numbers are staggering. The brutality is unspeakable, and the silence from global leaders is deafening. Let me share just one recent example. On February 9th, Fulani terrorists armed with AK-47s. These are not hunting rifles. These are rifles designed to kill. I served, after coming out of the Marine Corps, I worked with the State Department in anti-terrorism and very familiar with the mode and operation of terrorists. They stormed a village in Gombe State. They first seized a 9-year-old boy from the Puma family and demanded ransom. They then sought out the Reverend Bala Galadima's home. They found him, they broke into his home, they demanded money. He pleaded with them, saying that he had none, but he offered them what he had. He had grain, so he offered them grain. They refused. They shot him 3 times, killing him. Sadly, this is not an isolated incident. In late January, Boko Haram launched a series of coordinated attacks on Christian villages in Chibok, the same region where 276 schoolgirls were kidnapped in 2014, Mr. Chairman. You'll remember that. We discussed it then. In fact, many of those girls remain captives to this day. The terrorists set homes and churches ablaze, destroyed livestock, and demanded that Christians convert or they die. More than 4,000 believers have been forced to flee for their lives in recent weeks alone. As has been mentioned, according to Open Doors, more Christians are murdered for their faith in Nigeria than any other country in the world. In 2024 alone, 3,100 Christians were killed. 2,830 were kidnapped. These are not just numbers. These are fathers, their mothers, their children, their families. The case of Leah Sheribu underscores the horror of this crisis. Leah was just 14 years old when Boko Haram kidnapped her and 108 other girls from their school in 2018. The terrorists eventually released all the girls except Leah. Why? Because she refused to renounce her Christian faith. Reports suggest she is still alive and now held as a prize by her captors, as she has been forced to bear children in captivity. As a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, I met with her family multiple times and worked with the previous administration to track her, hopefully trying to gain her freedom. We were not successful. This is what religious persecution in Nigeria looks like. It is violent, it is brutal, and it is worsening. In 2020, the Trump administration, based on recommendations from USCIRF, and I was a part of that leadership team, Nigeria was designated as a country of particular concern. This was an essential step, recognizing the Nigerian government was failing to protect religious minorities from systematic violence. Yet in 2021, the Biden administration inexplicably removed Nigeria's CPC designation, despite the fact that attack against Christians had increased. Former Secretary of State Antony Blinken later suggested in a meeting with USCIRF members, which I was present, that these massacres were caused by climate change, that desperate Fulani herders were simply looking for pasture land. Let me be clear, this is not about climate change. It's about a violent extremist ideology that seeks to eliminate Christianity from Nigeria's northern and central regions. The evidence is undeniable. This is systematic religious violence. The U.S. government must act, and they must act now. Nigeria must be redesignated a country of particular concern. Biden administration's removal of this designation was a reckless mistake that emboldened the very terrorists who are slaughtering Christians. The evidence overwhelmingly meets the legal threshold under the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, which requires CPC status for governments that engage in or tolerate severe violations of religious freedom. That's exactly what Nigeria's government has done. It has failed to protect all of its citizens from religious violence. The U.S. must impose consequences. Under the International Religious Freedom Act, the President has the authority to take action against CPC-designated nations, including economic penalties. The U.S. should apply targeted sanctions against Nigerian officials who are complicit in religious persecution, as well as suspend certain trade benefits until concrete actions are taken to protect all Nigerians. Religious freedom protection must be tied to U.S.-Nigerian relations. The administration should make it clear that Nigeria's treatment of religious minorities will directly impact diplomatic and economic relations, including trade agreements and security assistance. Finally, the U.S. must reappoint a strong, high-profile ambassador for international religious freedom. During the first Trump administration, this role was used effectively under the leadership of Ambassador Sam Brownback to apply global pressure on persecuting nations. The momentum for that must be regained. In closing, Mr. Chairman, it is time for the United States to send an unmistakable message, to draw a red line. The slaughter of Christians and other religious minorities in Nigeria will not be tolerated. If Nigeria continues to allow terrorists to burn churches, execute pastors, and kidnap schoolgirls with impunity, there must be consequences. This is not just about Nigeria. It is about the future of religious freedom, the stability of Africa, the moral credibility of the United States. If we fail to act, make no mistake about it, this crisis will spread. Refugees will flood into neighboring countries. Terrorists will grow bolder. And America's silence will embolden jihadists worldwide. Chairman Smith, members of the committee, thank you for helping raise awareness of the need to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. The world is watching, but more importantly, the religious persecution and those who are the victims of that in Nigeria are watching. They're waiting to see if America will stand with them and for them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins, for your testimony and your leadership as well. And your work on the Religious Freedom Commission was legendary. We do have Maureen Ferguson here with us today, who's a commissioner on the Religious Freedom Commission. Dominic Cuzo, who's a pastor from my district, who's very involved with the religious freedom issue. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to just point out David Trimble is here as well from RFI. When I did the bill in 2019, it was a religious freedom, Frank Wolf, we named it after Frank Wolf. Got it passed in the Senate. It was dead in the water on the Senate side, and he did so much to get it passed, and I want to thank him for that, because otherwise it would have been just another House-passed bill, like we all know. It goes over to the Senate, and that's the graveyard of legislation, but I want to thank him for what he did to get that through. I'd like to now recognize, and again, thank him profusely for traveling here, and at great risk. Bishop, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for giving me an opportunity to be heard at a critical time in my country, and particularly my state, Benue. I am Wilfred Chikbanabodi, that appear here as the bishop, the Catholic Bishop of Makurdi Diocese, the capital of Benue State in Nigeria. I am the shepherd of one of the 4 dioceses, Catholic dioceses in Benue. We have others, Anglican, Methodist, and Pentecostals, which certainly Benue State has a population of about 6.1 million people, 2 million of whom are those under my care as the bishop of the diocese. Benue State is about 98% Christian, with very few Muslims living in towns. Nigeria and eventually my diocese and the state of Benue have become, in recent years, one of the most dangerous and insecure places for Christians. Christians and Muslims are nearly evenly divided among Nigeria's large population of over 200 million persons. Islamist extremists are fiercely contesting the possession, control, and governing law of the land, especially in the country's northern and central regions, the latter of which is where Benue is located. There are constant ethnic, political, and religious conflicts over land and allegiance. Constitutionally, we are a secular country, but our unity has been fragile. Political and religious actions and even public speech have been carefully managed to avoid accusations of religious bias and political tensions. Today, the clear influence of Islamist extremists has changed the traditional social dynamics of tribe, ethnicity, religion, and the social status in Nigeria. Because just recently, at the beginning of the Ramadan fast, 12 states in northern Nigeria have declared closed schools so that they attend to this. And you can imagine which other country in the world does that. Saudi Arabia is not doing it. Afghanistan is not doing it. Baghdad is not doing it, but then Nigeria is practicing. What kind of Islam are they practicing? 12 states, and not only Muslims are living in these places. What happens with the educational program or curriculum of the country? But this is what we are going through every day in Nigeria. A long-term Islamic agenda to homogenize the population has been implemented over several presidencies through a strategy to reduce and eventually eliminate the Christian identity of half of the population. This strategy includes both violent and non-violent actions, such as the exclusion of Christians from positions of power and adoption of such church members, the raping of women, the killing and exploitation of Christians, the destruction of churches and farmlands of Christian farmers, followed by the occupation of such lands by the Fulani herders, and also changing the names of these villages. They are taking over the places, so you clearly see an expansionist approach and Islamic, and then they are making the people now flee and leave their villages, and they conquer it. The quest to Islamize the land appears high on the agenda of some of the powerful and influential Muslims in Nigeria. There is a campaign to take land to spread Islam, and there is the hemorrhaging of Christian farmers from the central region of Nigeria and Benue State, and Makurdi Diocese in particular, as they are forced to abandon fertile lands that used to feed the nation, which classify Benue as the food basket of the nation. Militant Fulani herdsmen are terrorists destroying society. They steal and vandalize, they kill and boast about it. They kidnap and rape, and they enjoy total impunity from the elected authorities. None of them have been arrested and brought to justice. This is supported by the corrupt system in which we operate and the abject poverty among us, which allow the criminals to easily attract more recruits and prey on more victims. Why is this happening? Is it really a religious war? Like in the past, many jihadists are motivated less by religion than by spoils of war and use their religion to impose themselves. In my diocese, the spoils consist mainly of fertile, well-tended land organized around my parishes or so. The jihadists come and adopt and kill the priests, leaving thousands without support and basic human services. And of course, when they disperse the people, the inhabitants, or the citizens, or the people of the lands, they take over. And any attempt to go back and take care of your farms, surely you get killed. The Makurdi Diocese in Benue State has been the epicenter of the invasion by these herders, who are more like hired guns of cattle oligarchies, who manipulate religion to rally the herders to eliminate the Christian population and cleanse the land in the name of Islam. This objective is behind the relentless attacks against Benue's villages. When we call for help to the police and the army, they do not come. At the end of 2024, several villages were warned by the attackers of the upcoming violence, and the leaders called the police for defense ahead of time. But they did not come, and the Christian massacres, almost customary, took place, killing hundreds in Plateau and Benue, with the worst massacre claiming 47 people. The militant also burned down the 8 Catholic churches of St. Mary's Parish in the Diocese of Boko, which in Benue State, as well as the parish house, clinics, schools, and other houses. The militant Fulani herdsmen bear on defenseless villagers without consequences. They follow orders to conquer, kill, and occupy. They attack even those who have managed to escape into our IDP camps. Thereby, they have no place to run to. And it is unfortunate that the police system in Nigeria, orders have to come from above, and such that once there's a call, and they say they have never responded. And by the time they arrive, these people have left, and the people are now living in the pool of their blood. What I have recounted above is happening not only in Benue State. I believe our experience in Benue is symptomatic of what is happening elsewhere in large parts of Nigeria. The experience of the Nigerian Christians today can be summed up as that of a church under Islamist extermination. It is frightening to live there. Apart from the violent campaigns and attacks against Christian villages, there are now attempts by the Islamic Council of Nigeria and various Islamic groups to impose Sharia law on the Christian populations. Already, 12 states in the north of Nigeria are under this sectarian religious law, and attempts to extend the same to the south of Nigeria, which they have started. This month, governors in the north decided appropriately to close all schools and education institutions during the months of Ramadan, leaving millions of students without learning opportunity for 5 weeks. We live in fear because at any point it can be our turn to be killed, but to remain silent is to die twice. So, I have chosen to speak. I speak on behalf of the millions who are in the camps. In Benue State, in Makurdi Diocese alone, in my diocese, I have about 9 camps. 9. On the 5th of March, which was Ash Wednesday, we visited one of the camps, and many of my priests and religious went to the other camps, distributed them to begin the Ash Wednesday with our faithful who are there, because we are the voice of the voiceless. We have to talk for the defenseless. We have to talk about the weak and those who cannot talk about themselves. In one of the camps called the Mega Camp, there were over 3,000 inmates of that camp, and which was a record given to us by government. I speak on behalf of them and those children who have no husband, who have no father, and even their own voices taken away by the politicians who promised to help them but have become the willing tools of the jihadists because they are talking politically correct statements, looking for next elections to come. I speak on behalf of those whose loved ones have been killed, but no one has even offered a word of consolation to them. I speak on behalf of the thousands of young girls who have been adopted and raped because no one, not even the media, mentions them anymore. Foremost, I speak on behalf of my flock who are unable to worship freely and unable to return to their ancestral farms and homes because that land has been ruthlessly taken from them by the armed herdsmen. And where they say they want to live in peace with the natives, if you must farm, you have to pay tax to hire the land which belongs to you. That is slavery, to say the least about it. As prosperous Nigeria is in African continent, and tell you, if there's outbreak of war in Nigeria, no country around us, Chad, Niger, Ghana, Guinea, Togo, no country can contain the population that will flee to these places. No country can be able to house over 5 million refugees. It's not possible because of that. And if 1 million refugees run to Chad and Niger, they'll collapse that country because there'll be no plan to take care of them. So we have to be very careful. Today, I urge you all to use every means within your mandate to start developing a strong and good relationship with Nigeria, where you know that when you speak of human dignity, you are also speaking of the same God-given right you believe is unalienable. Consider that Nigeria can be your ally, but it cannot be one where half the population is in the process of being murderously eliminated. Work with us, the churches, and other Nigerians of goodwill. We are working for a peaceful and prosperous society, and our desperate plight has been set aside in U.S. policy for too long, to the cost of thousands of lives. Concretely, I request and I plead, I ask you to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. This has both a practical and diplomatic meaning to signal that you are paying attention to what happens to us and elsewhere in the world. Because the policies the government is trying to put in place, so that to return the IDPs, build camps for them, relocate them from their homes, it is not durable and it will not work, because the government has already the population that is not able to take care of, and then you have over millions of people in the camps, and you want to relocate them to where? And if you do, let's take that you do, how many houses or rooms will you give me who has 5 children, another one has 3, another one has 2, and what will I be doing for a living? These people previously never begged anybody for food. They were managing their lives, training their children, and building their homes. So nobody should have deceived us on the guys that you're going to reset to the IDPs. They have no jobs. So where you set them, what will be their place? And by the way, the fundamental question remains, if you resettle them to other camps or build places for them, what happens with the ancestral lands? Who takes care of them? And this is whereby I feel the government is complicit on this issue. Because these terrorists, Fulanis, displace them, kill people, and then occupy the place, and then change names, nomenclatures of these towns. For what reason? So we want to let the people go back to their homes and help for them to rebuild their lives. I implore this august body to insist on the return and rehabilitation of all the IDPs to their ancestral lands, and not to relocate them to other constructed camps elsewhere, which is an invented solution now being pushed in the Benue state government. And I tell you, Nigeria government can do that once they have to be accountable. Because I know Nigeria, under the auspices of ECOMOG, was able to reinstate constitutional government in Sierra Leone and Liberia. And they can do that now. We have the capacity, because the leaders that are not prepared. And I think that's whereby I look. It's not just, conspiracy of silence. It is aiding, abetting, and supporting these terrorists to keep doing their work.
Did indicate in my opening comments that how we tried to get Boko Haram designated as a foreign terrorist organization, and they had even blown up a building that killed some UN types, including an American in Abuja, and all of that was just overlooked. What Johnny Carson said here in this room at that hearing was that all as Boko Haram was trying to do was to embarrass Goodluck Jonathan, then the president. I said, are you kidding me? Embarrass him? How about when they took the Chibok girls, and I met with several of the Chibok girls that escaped. There were a few that escaped, and I met with many of their parents. It had everything to do with turning them into slaves and abusing them horribly and forcing them to change from being Christians. Some were Muslim to begin with, but not many, to a coercive conversion on their part, and that woke up some people here, but not enough. So your point about failure to govern I brought it up with Buhari many times as well, and got nowhere. There was an effort to have a cooperation on the security side. There was a fusion center, as you might know. I visited it, where our military wanted to work side by side with their military to especially use the best and latest means of combating Boko Haram at the time, and they went nowhere. The Leahy Amendment was invoked by our side. So I had a hearing on that. Found out that half of the people that we could have trained would have easily passed muster under the Leahy Amendment. In other words, they didn't have human rights violations attributed to them. But it never happened. It was a great idea, but it went nowhere. So you're right. We need to revisit how do we work together on security. And again, if I call my local police department in Manchester, New Jersey, because a crime has been committed, and they don't show up, that is a gross neglect and a gross failure to govern, and that is what, as we know, the Christians are facing each and every day. So I thank you for that, and I thank all of you. Just a couple of quick points, and I'll yield to my distinguished colleagues. In 2016, I should say, I did write the follow-on to Frank Wolf's famous historic law called the International Religious Freedom Act. We put a couple of things in there, entities of particular concern. Boko Haram is on that list, but I do think the Fulani need to be on that list as well, so that's something we should ask the administration to do. We had a designated persons list where individuals are committing egregious violations of human rights. Back in 2004, I was the author of the Belarus Democracy Act. That legislation, which was the first of its kind, and it led to the Magnitsky Act, because I was the sponsor of that. We put that into the NDAA to get it passed. But it said we target individuals, not just the whole country, but individuals who are particularly severe in what they do, with no visa and no ability to engage economically with the United States in any way, shape, or form. My hope is that and I invite you, and I invite anyone who has pertinent information of any particular persons that need to be on that list, so that we can individually sanction them. We've done it in other countries all over the world, started with Belarus, with Lukashenko, but others have been targeted as well. In DR Congo, a lot of Kabyles people were targeted. It's a very effective mechanism to isolate them while we're working on the country itself. So I invite you, any individuals that you think should be on there. And again, I do think that the Fulani ought to be an FTO as well. Not only should they be designated an entity of particular concern, but they need to go onto the foreign terrorist organization list because of what they're doing. Let me also, and get your thoughts on this, and remind everybody that country of particular concern requires an annual designation of countries as to where governments engage in or tolerate. That's the language of the statute, or tolerate a particularly severe violation of religious freedom during the reporting year. During the Obama year, again, I had hearings on this again, they wouldn't even name countries. So I asked them, where's the countries? It says in the statute, you shall, doesn't say you may, and we didn't even get a country or a list of those countries. So we need to up our game, if you will, on promoting religious freedom everywhere. In Nigeria, in my opinion, it's just stands out as an area that we need to do so much more for. So if you want to speak to any of those thoughts about entities of particular concern, my hope is that the president, I think Mr. Perkins, you put it well, that a very robust effort will be coming soon with regards to religious freedom everywhere, including in Nigeria. I mean, the suffering brethren of all kinds. And I met with, every time I go, I meet with imams. If they speak out, they've got a mark on their back, and they'll be killed by the weekend. And I'm not exaggerating. I heard it from so many. I began to say, okay, they're not going to speak out. And I remember one particular imam telling me how Boko Haram, they're not us. And I said, I know that. You know, that they are a radicalized group of people who kill and maim and slaughter and rape in order to get their way. So law enforcement, if any of you want to speak to that, it seems to me that's so basic. If you don't have a government that responds to a request, if you had a fire going, would the firefighters show up? I hope so. Well, law enforcement needs to show up. And when they start prosecuting people, you'll see a different situation in Nigeria, I believe.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, yeah, I'd like to respond to that. I think you're right. Everyone on this witness table has said the same thing, that there's been this failure to hold accountable the perpetrators of these atrocities. And it's actually worse than someone robbing your home. It's a systematic, coordinated attack that cleanses entire villages and farming areas of the population who have a certain religious profile that they don't like, I guess. But we don't know. We really don't know what the motives or intents are because the government doesn't investigate or bring to trial anyone for these horrible attacks. And as the bishop pointed out, and he is incredibly courageous to come forward today, as he said, he doesn't want to die twice. I hope not even once. But once this process happens of a clearing an entire village, burning the property, and taking control of it, the IDPs are then sent to temporary camps where the churches help or others help, and feed them and sustain them until they're permanently relocated somewhere else, maybe a bigger camp, maybe to other parts of the country, maybe outside the country. This is not making any sense. It's not sustainable. And I think there has to be personal pressure because the government is not, has no political will. So no amount of programs are going to help this unless there is help resolve the situation if there's no political will to do anything. And that's what we're seeing over and over, year after year, 20 years of the Fulani herdsmen armed to their teeth with AKs. According to scholars who've written about this, Nigerians, that these guns are given to them, these weapons are given to them by the breeders, the cattle breeders, the cattle oligarchs, as the bishop called them. And they have to be held accountable. Also, the top people in the government have to be held accountable on a personal level. They want their visas, they want their bank accounts in the United States. I think this would have teeth. It's already law, and we should be getting the names of the criminal justice people who are failing, who are in the leadership of the government. And you're right. Nigeria is America's most important partner in Africa, and it is a land of the future, and there's a lot of promise there. And we need to help them get control of the out-of-control terror, and particularly this Fulani problem, whatever you want to call it, terror or criminality.
Ms. Jacobs.
I commend the House Committee on Foreign Affairs for their efforts to shed light on this issue. Chairman Brian Mast and the committee members has taken a crucial steps toward acknowledging the suffering of Nigerians. But we can't stop here. We need to continue raising awareness, advocating for policy changes, and as well as supporting organizations that work tirelessly to provide aids and relief to those who are affected badly. Therefore, let's keep the conversation going on and demand action from our leaders. I think that's the best thing to do, because we owe it to the victims and as well as to their families and to the people of Nigerians who deserve peace, justice, and dignity. Thank you for watching, and I encourage you to share your thoughts and reactions in the comment section below. Once again, thank you for checking in and thank you for clicking. Please don't forget to follow us so that by the time we post a new video, you'll be the first person to be notified about the new video. Thank you.